Okay, how's it going? This is our Flat Fixing 201. If you want a really quick synopsis of a flat fix, we also have the Flat Fixing 101, which is also available. And this one we're going to go into more detail. So not something you're going to watch on the road, but it'll give you a much better idea of what to look for, what caused your flat, and how to make sure you don't get another one before you can even get home. So there's three types of flats. I'm going to let a little air out of this to help as an example. But you have punctures, which is thorns, glass, metal, anything like that. And generally a puncture is going to cause a flat anywhere from 30 seconds to sometimes get a really slow puncture. It can take a day. Pinch flats are going to be a lot quicker and are generally a direct result and immediately after you hit something too hard. It can be a rock, it can be a pothole. If you're mountain biking, it can be roots and boulders. The last one would be blowouts, and that is generally a tire failure. So it can be a slice or a cut, or also if the bead of a tire comes off the rim, the tube's gonna come out and blow out or rupture, and that's also would be a blowout. So to get slight more detail on those, if you get a blowout, there's a couple things you can do. You're gonna have to put a new tube in there. You can't, a big blowout, you can't put plugs in it if it's tubeless. And if you just put a new tube in that same tire, it is gonna just blow out again. That would be if you have a slice here and you might not even see it initially, but when you reinflate a new tube in there, it is going to expand and come out and rupture again. Like I said, those are generally going to be a very loud, rapid, like it sounds like a gunshot when you get a blowout. So that one, I'll show you how to do a tire patch. The next one, and part of why I deflated this, is a pinch. So if you hit something, it actually, what it does is it pinches the tube inside there between the tread and the rim, and you'll get, it's also called a snake bite. You'll get two holes in the tube, and that just means you were running too low a pressure for the situation, or you just nailed something too hard and there's nothing you could do about it. So if you know what kind of flat you got, it's a lot easier to know what to look for as you're changing it. Like I said, a blowout, you're gonna have to fix your tire. Pinch flat, all you have to do is put a new tube in and put enough pressure in to not do it again. The puncture, the slow release of pressure, means you're gonna have to look at what's in the tire and see if there's still a thorn or a piece of glass or metal somewhere in the tire that is gonna cause the next tube that you put in to go flat as well. So it's fairly important to have some idea. Otherwise, it can be a little bit of a crapshoot as to whether your fix is gonna hold or not. Okay, so as in the 101 class, I'll show you briefly. One of the big things is to release whatever remaining pressure is in the tire. So it's totally flat. That's gonna make it a lot easier to get the tire off the rim. And then the next thing is to pinch the bead all the way around so that it's not locked onto the rim and it gives you some slack. So like right now, because I did that, I can pull the tire up and have a lot of slack to get the tire lever in. Nice plastic tire lever, so I'm not gonna damage the rim. And when I put the new tube in, I'm not gonna cut that new tube. So here we go, use the tire lever. Take that bead of the tire off, so now the tube is exposed in there. I'm gonna push the valve up, pull that out, pull the dead tube out. All right, so if this was a puncture, at this point, first thing would be to go around looking at generally the puncture is gonna be on the tread of the tire, and I'm gonna run my fingers along a little bit behind where I'm looking, because if I see a big piece of glass or a nail, or even a big thorn, I don't want to like rake my fingers over it. The fingers are to catch the little things that you can't see initially. So going around, looking for something stuck in the tire and feeling for anything rough or sharp on the inside. It oftentimes doesn't take much. You can barely feel it in there, but as you're rolling over it, it just wears a hole in the tube and it'll cause a flat, whether it's in a mile or 10 miles. So in this case, we've gone around. If we are thinking it was a puncture based on how it went flat, the other possibility is that whatever it is went in and came out. It could be a piece of glass or a piece of metal that was big enough that it just punctured as it rolled over and then didn't stay stuck in the tire. So if that's the case, after we check the tire, we can get out our new tube, put it in here, and inflate it, which I'll show you in just a sec. If it was a pinch flat, like I said, if you're confident you hit something hard and within a couple minutes it is flat, you don't have to even look for the puncture. You just put in the new tube, fill it up, and you're good to go. If it's a blowout or something really rapid, then you can definitely look. Sidewalls are weak, these parts right here, so that's a weak spot. Treads, whether it's on a mountain bike or a road bike, the tread has a lot more reinforcement. So even on a road bike, a lot of times a blowout will be caused by a sidewall cut because something hooks around and cuts the side of the tire, and that leads to the tube rupturing. So if you think it was a blowout, you can go around and look. I'm trying to stretch it out here because oftentimes it'll seal back up without the pressure. So put a little pressure on it, go around, and you can do this on both sides. Looking for a cut in the sidewall. If that's what the cause was and you don't fix it and you don't put a tire patch in there, it'll just do it again in a short distance. So say you do catch it, the next thing is, so if you don't catch it that way, and so go ahead and put the tube in and start inflating it, but only inflate it a little bit and then check again, because as the tube starts to apply pressure to the tire, wherever that cut is will start expanding, and then you can see it. At which time then you're gonna have to put a tire patch in there. So ironically enough, I used this as a tire patch on a mountain bike ride not long ago, waiting to give it back to its owner, which wasn't me. But something like a dollar bill works great, or a Cliff Bar wrapper or a goo wrapper, something like that. So let's imagine there's a cut right here. So I would take this, put it inside right there, and I would hold it there as I put the tube in, and I would partially inflate the tube, check to make sure this was in the right spot, and then fully inflate the tube. And it's gonna give enough reinforcement to the casing right there of the tire that it's not gonna let the tube blow out and explode. So dollar bills are great. All right, so let's say we have pulled out the old tube. It was a puncture, it was a pinch flat. If it was a puncture, we pulled out whatever it was, or we don't know if it was a blowout. So we're gonna go ahead and put this back in. Go ahead and put your valve back in, pull the tire over top. This part is definitely much easier if you put a little bit of air in the tube. If it's dead flat, as if when you take it out of the box, it's really hard to get it to stuff into the tire. So a little bit of air in there, stuff it up in the tire, all the way around. Make sure, like, if you have some sticking out like this, try to stuff it up on top of the rim so that you're not crushing it under the bead of the tire when you're trying to put it all on. And then go back to where the valve is and start putting the bead back on. Like this, thumbs starting at the back all the way around. Oftentimes, a lot of tires, this one's pretty easy, but a lot of times you'll get to here and it'll get really difficult. So what you want to do there is hold one side with one hand and then pry using your thumb on the bead right here and twisting the tire over to pop it over that last little bit. Like I said, that one was really easy. Hopefully yours is too. And then, so we got the bead all the way back on the tire. Last thing we're gonna do here is press the valve here. This is a Presta valve. Press it up into the tire to make sure that the tire is not sitting on top of the tube. So now we know that the tube's inside the tire. If the tire is on top of the tube, when you inflate it, it'll actually push the tire up off the rim and you'll have a blowout that way. So push that up like that, and then you should be good to go. So now I'm gonna inflate it a little bit. I'll show you in a second how this would be with a hand pump or a CO2. But right here, we're just gonna cheat and use a compressor. So I just put about 6 or 8 PSI in there. And what I'm doing now is I'm looking at the bead to make sure that it is seated all the way around the tire, both sides. Ideally, when you take the tube out, like I just did, you don't have to unseat both sides, so it makes it a lot easier. And so the primary one you're looking at is the one that you had to pull off. But make sure both sides are good. And then the next thing is, if you think you might have had a blowout, you're gonna wanna look at this point for any spots where a cut is gonna start expanding. So, like I said, usually it's gonna be in the sidewall, but it can also be, sometimes you'll get something big enough that it'll cut in the tread. So take a good look. If you're not confident it was a pinch or a puncture, look for anything like that. Sometimes too, if you have like a old time rim brake, it can rub the tire right along the bead, and that will create a slice that will rupture and blow out. So if you have rim brakes, take a look for that as well. So we're looking good. We've got it seated. There's no slices that are expanding, no blowouts. So at this point, we'll go ahead and top off the tire up to, in this case, because the tire integrity is good, we're gonna go ahead and go all the way up to our optimal pressure. In this case, it's 45 for this mountain bike. And we're gonna close our Presta valve nut. We're gonna put our rim nut on there. And if you want, and neither of those are mandatory by any means, but we'll also put the valve cap on there. All right, now this is ready to put back on the bike, and off you go. One other thing to remember, whether it's a puncture that is maybe bigger or any kind of slice or blowout that you potentially put a tire patch on, one good way, you just need to get home at that point. So one good thing to do is not go up to that full pressure. In this case, if it's 45 PSI, that for optimal mountain biking pressure, if this tire is compromised, if you go up to 25 PSI, that'll be enough to get you home riding gingerly. But it's also gonna take a lot of the strain off of the tire and your fix or your patch. So there's a lot better chance you're gonna get home at a little lower pressure than if you were to be running it at full pressure. So if you think there's any, if the tire's compromised at all, there's no need to go to full pressure, run it lower. That also applies if you have old dried out tires or anything like that. Like, you never have to go to max pressure. Some tires just won't take it. Okay, so now, once you got everything on there, on the trail or on the road, you're gonna have to inflate these. Two common ways are either mini pumps, a little pump that fits on your bike that you can inflate. They work great and you can use them as many times as you ever want. Downside is it takes, for a mini pump, takes a good, I usually go by 50s. 50 pumps, check the pressure. Usually takes about 150 pumps to actually get it where you want it. So it takes a little bit. So for that, on this Presta valve, you wanna make sure your nut is undone there. Sometimes it's not a bad idea to tap it to make sure it's not stuck closed. And then in this case, this pump has a little hose that comes out, which is handy. Keeps you from bending your valve stem. But I'm gonna stick this on there and then lock it on. And then pump away. Like I said, in this case, I would go for like 50 pumps and then I would check the pressure, do another 50 pumps, but you can insert whatever jokes you want at this point. So there's actually already got some pressure in there, but imagine doing that for quite a bit longer to get it to the pressure that's going to get you out of the woods or back home off the road. And then remove that. One important part is to make sure that when you do remove these, you pull it straight. If you try to twist it and wiggle it, I'll show you what can happen. This little nut is on a tiny little rod. If you bend that, it will break, and that's going to compromise your ability to, well, either the tube to hold air or put more air into it in the future. So you want to make sure this little guy stays straight, and when you're done, you lock it back down. But I'm going to deflate this for a second to show you the other, probably more common method these days, which is CO2s. So CO2 inflator, this is a multi-inflator. This is the canister. So these guys are good for one use. If you're using these, you always want to carry two of them in case you have an issue where you don't seat the bead quite right the first time and you have to deflate it and then fill it again. Then you need a couple of these guys. So always try to carry at least two good ones, and remember to, when you use them or loan one out, that you need to put a new one in there. Can't tell you how many times I've been with people and they pull out their CO2s and they used them a year ago and forgot about it. And then this is a multi-inflator. So this can actually do a threaded or a non-threaded. If you can see this guy right here, this is a threaded canister. There's threads on there. If it's a non-threaded, you have to use an inflator like this that has a bottom part to it. So if this was non-threaded, we would be taking this, putting this in there and threading it up, and this would put the pressure on to puncture. Most of these multi-use heads are actually threaded inside here. So you can use a threaded canister inside here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do this, but I'll give you a couple tips before I do that. One is CO2 gets really cold. So for one, expect this canister, when I release it, it's going to freeze. And if you have wet gloves or your hands or fingers are wet, I mean, it can actually freeze to the canister. The other is, if you have a puncture on the tire, especially if it's tubeless, and you go and try to inflate it, and the CO2 goes out that hole, and if you happen to have your hand on it, which I did this once, you will pretty much give yourself frostbite in about 3 seconds. So just be aware that this stuff is really cold. So when you puncture it, you will hear a little air release, and you can go ahead and do that. They all have valves of one sort or another. So there we go. And if you want to test it, you can do that. There you go. And now I'm going to go ahead and put it on here and release air. In this case, I'm going to release about 1/3 to 1/2 of it. Real quick, this is already really cold, and I'm going to pull this off. Like that. Be prepared when you pull the CO2 off. Sometimes that little nut will freeze open, so you need to be ready to close that if it's leaking air out. Okay, so I only did 1/3 or 1/2 to be able to look at the bead of the tire, make sure I've got everything seated correctly, and the bead isn't coming up off the rim. And also, if there was a chance of a cut in the tire, then this is, with that partial inflation, I can look and see if I can see where the pressure is causing the tire, the cut, to separate. So in this case, everything looks good. It was either a puncture or a pinch flat. I've got it all seated. So now Gonna go ahead and finish this off. Put this back on. And yeah, it's freezing to my hand, really cold. Okay, there we go, that's good pressure. And pop this off, close this nut. Okay, this thing is frosty. Actually sticks to my fingers. This will hold pressure for an hour or two. So if you think you're gonna have to add more air, you can keep this sealed like it is, put it in your pocket or your bag, and you might get a little bit more out of it later. The other option is if you're all good to go, you can just empty it. So that's all there was left. And obviously don't throw these on the side of the road. Take them home, throw them in the garbage. And there you go. You're inflated and ready to put it back on the bike and ride home.